I'm Dan Betcher,
I'm Evan Berthold.
and today we will be interviewing Chuck Bloom on May 19th, 2018, and the video and audio work is done by Josh Ware.
My name is Charles Joseph Bloom III. I was not born with that name, which we had discussed. I was born Charles Leo Bloom on July 18th, 1943. I was named after my two grandfathers, Charles and Leo. Found out many years later that my grandpa Leo was really Joseph. My grandpa Charles, his name was Charles Joseph Bloom. My father's name was Charles Joseph Bloom. Our son said, why don't we just change our name to what the two grandfathers' names really were? So I became Charles Joseph Bloom III, also known as the Turd. My son is Charles Joseph Bloom IV, and my grandson is Charles Joseph Bloom V. So I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on 19th and Cherry, born in St. Michael's Hospital. Also, I have to tell you that my real last name is not Bloom. My real last name is Kabutsky. My grandfather had it changed in 1918 because of the war. He had come over from Poland, West Prussia at the time. When he came over and had the name changed, it was because of what was going on in West Prussia, Germany, etc., with the Second World War. Now, the funny story that goes with that is I had two aunts who were born with the last name Kazabutsky. And when they went to get married, the first one, there was no Kazabutsky listed anyplace. And that's when she found out that her last name had been changed to Bloom. So it was like 20 years later. So I lived with my grandparents on my mother's side for 3 years while my dad was in the Army. His tour in the Army took him to Italy and West Africa. When he came back, we then moved to live with my other grandparents, or my father's parents, and they lived at 140 East Concordia. And when they lived there, from what I understand, according to my father and my mother, when he worked, he turned his paycheck over to his mother, who lived downstairs. And apparently that's what was done back in those days, that you just were, I don't want to say subservient, but that's what you did. From there we moved to 2749A North 51st Street, which was a rear cottage, excuse me, off of a Milwaukee bungalow. And we lived there for a number of years. I went to first grade at, I want to say, 51st Street School. And then we moved to Berryland, which is on Florist Avenue, which is now known as the Hood. Berryland was a government housing project, and as long as you made X amount of dollars or less, you could live in that project. Everybody that lived there came from the same means, which means nobody had any money. Okay, it was a great place to grow up because we got to know a lot of the kids. Sorry, we've lost track of all of them. But it was a great place to grow up because everybody was the same. Nobody had any money. You all played together. There was no, well, you have this, I have it. It didn't exist. Went to Holy Redeemer Catholic School on 38th and Hampton. Went there from 2nd through 9th grade. On 6th grade, we moved to 4755 North 38th Street, which was right next to the school. There was a area that was owned by the church. So my mother got a job working for the church. My dad was working at Miller Brewing Company, and we moved between 4755 North 38th Street and 4769 North 38th Street, being that both buildings were owned by the church, depending on who was the janitor at the time and which house he wanted to live in. The 4755 was just probably an 800 square foot on top of a bungalow. Down below, the nuns from the school lived, so you really had to be careful. And then 4769 was just an independent house. So we lived there through 9th grade, continued to live there. Then I went to Mesmer High School. Mesmer High School, you guys know, used to be, and still, I don't know if it is anymore, a big competitor of yours. But when I went to high school, Mesmer and Marquette hated each other. Okay, it was just, that's just the way it went. So I went to high school there. I played baseball, made varsity as a sophomore, but because we came from very poor, humble background, I have to say, if I wanted to do anything, I had to get a job. So I quit sports and got a job working at Capitol Court, and worked at a restaurant which was owned by Schuster's. Worked there the whole summer. That's where I met my first girlfriend, and spent the summer together with her, spent my junior year with her, worked there, and then got switched over to another place in Capitol Court called the Corned Beef Corner. The corned beef corner was exactly what it is. It moved over to Oakland Avenue. It was Benji's. Great place to work, great men to work for, great men to work for. You guys would be blessed if you could find somebody like that in your lifetime who could be such a role model as far as what goes on. So I worked there until the summer of my junior year. Then I got a job working at Alice Chalmers in the factory third shift. It was then I realized that I knew when I grew up that I did not want to get a job working in a factory. That was not the lifestyle that was for me. And then I went back to the corned beef corner while I was in school for my senior year. And then I got a job working at Johnson Controls for the summer. Did that for 3 months and worked third shift. And while I was working third shift, I'd get home about 8 in the morning, get to bed about 8:30, and about 10:30 my friends would come over and say, come on, let's go down to the beach. So I got very little sleep back then. Graduated from high school, did not have a car, got a job working on 12th and Pierce on the south side, took a city bus to get to work. Took about an hour and a half, and I remember the winter standing on the 16th Street Viaduct, okay, waiting for my bus at about 20 below zero. The wind is blowing and that's just how it was back in those days. They ended up closing, so when they closed, I ended up getting a job working for a lighting engineer, and the guy's name was Ed Schnoll, and again, a very industrious man who made a lot of money, which he did not participate with me, but it was a good education. Okay, my highlight of that job was not only learning how to deal with people, but it told me that I think this is what I want to do with life, is to be involved with people in some kind of job. The other thing that he had, he sold outdoor lighting for football fields. And he asked me one time, he says, would you go up to Green Bay? He said, I just bought a new truck. He bought a 3/4 ton Ford pickup truck with a 40-foot boom ladder. And I said, sure. So I got up to Green Bay, picked up the truck, didn't realize that it was stick shift, and I did not know how to drive stick shift. So it took me about 15 minutes to realize, okay, this is how you do it, and the way I went. Later on during the year, he asked me if I would do a job for him because his sales guy in Green Bay was not available. So he had me take this truck up to the Green Bay area in the middle of winter, okay, put the boom ladder up 40 feet, and then it had 2 arms that extended out, and on top of that were 2 lights for football fields. So I had to climb the ladder. The boom truck is going like this to adjust the lights. We got the job, did not get a commission on it. Yeah, I got a big thank you very much, really appreciate it. Then I got drafted into the military in April of '64. My time in the military I spent was 2 years. It was an interesting time. I was sent to Fort Leonard Wood. Prior to that, the only time I was ever out of Milwaukee was I went to Chicago one time with my mom and dad to the Museum of Science and Industry. So this was my first real big trip. We took a bus down to Chicago, took a train down to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Got to Fort Leonard Wood on a bus at 2 in the afternoon. It was raining. We hadn't eaten lunch. So they took us into the mess hall, and there was a meatball, which looked delicious. There was what looked like mashed potatoes with gravy, which ended up being creamed onions, which I hated. The meatball, you could bounce off the floor. It was that hard and old, and you were told you couldn't leave until you ate everything on your plate. Well, I had 2 pieces of bread. I took the creamed onions, put them between the 2 pieces of bread, stuck it in my pocket, and then put the other meatball in the other pocket. So I went to our barracks, and they told us to just put down the little bag that we had. Then we went over and got our clothes, the Army, whatever clothes that they give you, and then take your other clothes and put them in a box, and they'd send them home for you. Well, I took those and threw in the garbage because of what I had in my pockets. We went through basic trainings, which I can't remember if it was 6 or 8 weeks. I was squad commander at the time. I had signed up for jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia. The highlight of my camp was, as I mentioned earlier when we had this conversation, two things. Two people were killed. One guy, we were out on bivouac, and we were going through mud under barbed wire in the middle of the night, and it was raining. And this was supposedly to get us ready for Vietnam. And one guy stood up, and he was instantly killed by the machine gun fire. And another guy who had a disagreement with his sergeant in the middle of the night took his little shovel that we had, which was a shovel this long but folded in half, came down like that, went off and chopped the guy's head off. So that was the highlight of camp. It was a good camp. Again, it realized that there are a lot of different kinds of people in the world, and you have to learn to deal with all of them. And I found that to be a great experience, to the point where I tell my grandkids, I wish everybody would spend 2 years in the military. Not go to war, okay, I don't condone that, but just to learn the discipline and to figure out with yourself what you want to do with your life. Because I can tell you, when I went into the military, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So I get released. They rescinded my orders for Fort Benning because I could type, and they sent me up to Minneapolis to an Air Force station. And it was a headquarters battalion. It was a Nike site. I was at the headquarters, and I spent my 2 years there with a little in between where I got to go down to Fort Sheridan. So when I got to Minneapolis, the captain and I were talking, and he says, well, we're going to send you out to they had 4 batteries with silos and missiles. And he says, we're going to send you out to Bethel, Minnesota. And I says, no, that wasn't the agreement I had when my orders got rescinded. What they told me was that you would be at the headquarters, because I told him I wanted to go to school. So he says, no problem. So I was able to spend my time in Minneapolis. I did go to the university for a couple of night classes. Again, because you didn't make a lot of money in the military at that time, and I had come home to get my car, I got a job working at it's called Southtown Bowl, which was a 36-lane bowling alley, 18 billiard tables, a bar, and a restaurant. And I was the night manager of that. And I did that for about 1 year. And that's where I met my wife. I had no intention, by the way, of getting married. I was going to come back to Milwaukee, go to school, and just party, because that's what you do when you're that age. So I met my wife, and I told the guy that I was working with that night. This girl came in, and I saw her, and I said to the guy's name was Charles Cook. I says, that's the girl I'm going to marry. 10 months later, we were married. But anyways, so in the summertime, because the bowling alley was closed part-time, I got a job tending bar at the Nokomis Inn. Now, the Nokomis Inn was on Lake Nokomis, and it was the hangout for all of the stewardesses and pilots and mechanics from Northwest Airlines. So it was a great place to meet a lot of different people. Okay. Then in January of '65, I had the opportunity to go to West Point Prep School because I had expressed an interest in furthering my career in the military, because I wasn't smart enough at that time to realize that's not what I wanted to do. So I went down to Fort Sheridan for 5 months, and they call it West Point Prep School. So you take a lot of classes in English and history and math. And I was able to come home on weekends, so that worked out really well for me, because I could spend time with my buds and then go back down there on Sunday night. When I got finished with that, I came back and I went back to camp, and my job had been taken, so I was not in a position to have my job. Now, what was my job? Why did they send me to Minneapolis? Okay. The Nike site was a clearing center for all the guys coming back from Vietnam. And my job was to process these people as they came back. And a lot of sad stories, a lot of funny stories. Met some interesting characters. Went out with 2 one night, thought I was going to get killed. By the way, they drove their car, but everything turned out well. And it was a great experience. Okay, I'd recommend the military if you didn't have to go to war for everybody. So I come back and they don't have a job for me. So I go talk to the captain, and the captain and I were pretty good buds. So I got to drive. My job was just to pick up the mail, deliver and pick up the mail twice a day. So it was a bunny job. So I really enjoyed that. But I also played baseball, as I mentioned, when I was in high school. Okay, so I'll go back to my time at basic training. They always ask you, you know, who did this or who did that, and you don't want to volunteer for anything, because if you volunteer, you usually end up doing a lot of work. So they said, who plays baseball? So I said, I used to pitch. So they said, okay, and they took me over to the area, and I ended up playing baseball for a couple of weeks with Ray Sadecki, who was a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, Tim McCarver, who was the catcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, and some guy who was a center field for the Cleveland Indians. These guys were all on Army Reserve, and they had to spend their 2 weeks in camp, and this is where they were, so I had that opportunity. So fast forward now, I come back, and I joined the softball team that we had at our place, and we're out playing ball one day, and it's softball. So I'm on second base, and the guy hits the ball, and I come around third, and I'm going home, man, and that ball's coming, and I'm going, and the colonel is the catcher, and I lay him out, just flat lay him out. And now everybody's screaming and yelling. Okay, you know, why'd you do that? Blah, 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 blah. So the sergeant major and I were good friends also, and he said, timeout, guys, this is baseball. Okay, there's no rank in baseball, we're just here to play the game. So everybody shut up and get back to playing. And there was never a repercussion. The colonel didn't say anything. So everything turned out well for me. So I continued my time in the service, driving the truck for that length of time. And then it was later that fall that I met my wife. Brought her home here in December. Met her in November. In December, she moved down here in April, and we got married in September. It's going to be 52 years this year that we've been married. So I come back to Milwaukee, and I need to get a job, and a friend of mine got me a job working for the railroad, the Milwaukee Road. And I did that for 5 months. While I was doing that, I went to MATC at night school, or day school. So I'd work at night, go to school during the day, and get a couple 3 hours sleep, and then go to work that night. Once that job ended, I needed to get another job, so I ended up working for the Wisconsin Electric Company, and like I told you, this was probably the worst job in my life that I've ever had. I worked in the cost accounting department, and for the summer it was kind of cool because we went out to all the substations, and our job was to count everything and then go back and enter them into the log. Well, I didn't realize once we got back and were sitting in the office, number one, there were no telephones and again, now I consider myself at that time, I was a people person. So I'd like to visit, and there was no telephones at the desk. You were not allowed to eat or drink coffee at your desk. You were not allowed to smoke, which I didn't do at the time. But if you smoked, you could go downstairs into the smoking area or outside. So I took up smoking so I could just get the heck out of the office. You were not allowed to talk at your desk. And I remember once we got back in the office and the Packers had done something spectacular on Sunday, and I turned to the guy next to me and I says, "Hey, did you see that Packer game last night?" He goes, "Shh." And I thought, this is not for me. So I worked there June, July, August, September. And in that period of time, I lost about 25 pounds. So I went down and I was talking to the doctor, who I think eventually was a psychiatrist. And he says, best thing I can tell you is quit your job. He says, you just don't like your job here. And I says, well, I hate this job here. He says, get a different job. So I ended up going to the unemployment office downtown Milwaukee, and she gave me a list of 3 jobs. And one was a sales correspondent for a company called Teledyne Wisconsin Motors on 53rd and Burnham. So I interviewed there and I got the job, and I started as a sales correspondent. And I was still living we were married now. Okay, so we were living on 2749A North 51st Street. Now, if you remember, that's where I lived when I was about 5 years old. The place was owned by a man and his wife called his name was Stanley Cato. And my parents had got to know him, and then after my parents moved from there, my aunt and uncle lived there for that period of time. And they were going to buy a house, and it just happened to fall at the time that we were looking for a place to live. So we were able to move into a rear cottage, which was 1 bedroom and a kitchen and a living room and a bathroom. I stress bathroom because when I lived there, when I was 5 years old, all there was a toilet. There was no bathtub. We took bathtubs in a a rubber bathtub which you brought out once a week to take your bath, and you all shared the same water. So we moved there, and we had a good time while we were there, and I'm working on 53rd and Burnham, and I love the job. And they said, you're being hired with the understanding that in 5 years, you'll be a salesperson and you'll go on the road and have a territory. And I says, okay, that's great. This sounds like this is what I want to do. So I'm there about a year, and they said, I'd like you to move to New York. And I said, there is no way I'm going to New York. I said, I'm newly married. My wife is here from Minneapolis, so that's difficult for her, number one. Okay, and to move me to New York, I says, it's not going to happen. So they said, okay, so they took a guy out of the service department and moved him there. And the highlight of his career, other than he was German, he couldn't go back to Germany because he left. He was a draft dodger from Germany, so he could not go back. But one of the distributors that we had for Wisconsin Motors was in Jamaica, New York. And his first trip there, he was hiding under his car because there was a gun battle going on. So that's how bad that area was. So fortunately, I didn't have to go there, and I continued my job as a sales correspondent to eventually get laid off. And they came to me and says, okay, this is only temporary. Okay, you'll be off for about a month, and then we'll call you back. So I was off a month, so I got a job painting a couple of houses inside. Now, I knew how to paint because when I was 12 and 13 years old, I had a paper route. Once I gave that up, I had to do something. Again, had no money, so I got a job working for the school painting, and it was outdoor painting, and the house that we painted was a 3-story with gables. So here I am, 13 years old, up on a ladder way, way up doing painting. So I get a job painting. I painted 3 houses, 2 inside and 1 outside in that month's period of time, and then got called back to work. When I got called back to work, and our shop was a part of the UAW came in to organize the office workers. And I was not part of the organization part at that time, but once it got organized, I became the secretary for the union. Now, what's the advantage of that? If there is a layoff, the officers in the union are the last people to get laid off. So now my boss gets all aggravated with me saying, yeah, what are you doing? And I said, this is just for my protection. I says, I know how bad this union is now. I think unions had their place back then. Our union was terrible in the shop to the point where all the guys were on piecework, and they were probably done working at noon, and they just sat around with their feet up on their tables reading the newspaper. And I said to a couple of the guys, I says, we should bring your wives in here someday and just show them how hard you work after lunch. So, ha. But it got so bad that when I eventually went on the road and wanted to bring customers back in for a tour of the plant, the union had to be notified that this is what I'd like to do, and they set the time when we could bring these people in for the tour. So it was kind of sad to see that this is what goes on with that type union. Okay, and eventually they went broke, but I'll get to that. So I get my job back, and I'm back. I'm in the union. I'm a officer in the union. Spent a lot of time in Detroit negotiating contracts, which was interesting. The guy that was in charge of the UAW at that time was Ray Majerus' dad. You guys know who Ray Majerus was, right? The coach for Marquette? Yeah, way back. He was a basketball coach. Okay, so this was his dad, and the guy was just an absolute character, not a super nice person. So anyway, so I'm in the union, and I'm working as my correspondent job, and we partner with a company called Hotz Diesel, and one of our guys at work becomes the manager, and he's looking for an assistant, and I says, hey, I think I'd like to do that. So I apply for it, and I get that job, and now my boss, my sales manager, says, what are you doing? He says, you're being trained to go on the road. I says, I understand. I said, this will just help me with my training. It's no big deal. So I do that for a number of years. I want to say a year and a half. And in 1969, we buy our house on 75th Street, just off of Hampton. And then our first child was born on 4/4/69. Okay. I was then given a territory which was the Wisconsin Territory. So I traveled Wisconsin, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Iowa, and Canada. And it was an experience all in itself, because this was an opportunity to really see if this is what I wanted to do with my life, and it was. I really enjoyed it. So I had an interesting time. It was before computers, so everything you did was done by hand. There were no phones, so if you had to call the office, you either used a pay phone or you used the phone from where you were. Nothing too interesting as far as what went on in that period of time until 1972, when they transferred me and my family down to Ohio. Now, prior to that, we had a daughter born on 8/18/1970. So now we moved to Ohio, and my territory then was almost all of the East Coast from Ohio down, which was fortunate for us because we were able to take our time at Thanksgiving and spend 2 weeks down in Florida. Now, I worked. It wasn't like we had a party, but the family was at least able to go down there and spend some time on the beach and go to Disney World and all that stuff that goes with when you're down in Florida. Nothing exciting happened in Ohio that I'm aware of. And then we partnered with a company called Fuji Heavy Industries out of Japan. And we were to sell their engines. And their engine was called the Robin engine, which was a very good product. And I kept saying to my boss, somebody needs to be in charge of that program, because there wasn't any, you couldn't get anything done. So in 1976, they transferred me back and made me the product manager for that product line, which was absolutely spectacular because I had the opportunity to travel to Japan. First time I went, I flew direct from Chicago, which I said, okay, I'll never do that again because it's too long of a flight, and spent 3 weeks in Japan. And I says, then I'll never go for 3 weeks again. So I would go for 2 weeks at a time. I'd take my engineer with me or whoever had to go with me. Okay. My time in Japan was I can't tell you how wonderful it was to see these people, how they live, and how open they were to me and the people that I brought with me to do business with them. So while I was working before I went back to, I'm at Wisconsin Motors, and I became the product manager. Now, my boss at the time was a guy by the name of Tom Barrett. Does that sound familiar? It's our mayor's son, our father. Okay. Super nice guy. Yeah, super nice guy. So I'm working for him, and then he leaves. He takes a distributorship, and that job opens up. So I go up and I talk to the VP, who was a very interesting man, knew a lot of people, and was a pilot in the Second World War, very diverse in what he could do. When we'd have Christmas parties, the women hated him because he would dance like a crazy guy, but he was a good dancer. It's just they couldn't keep up with him. I was in New York one time with him, and we went into a jazz club, and he walked right up to the stage and knew a couple of the guys, and sat down. He sat down at the piano and filled in, and just the guy was just unbelievable. So Tom Barrett leaves. Sales manager's jobs opens up. I talk to my boss. We sit down with the president. He says, the job is yours. I says, awesome. Well, Wisconsin Motors was owned by Continental Motors, which was out of Michigan, and they made airplane engines. They were bought out by Ryan Aeronautics, which was big in the military. And a year later, they were bought out by Teledyne, which owned 150-some companies. I'm setting the background because a week after I got the job, the president called me in and said, I have to take the job away from you. And I said, oh. He says, they're sending in somebody from Teledyne. Okay. It was a vice president who was down at their Mobile, Alabama plant. He got fired because of something to do with some women. So he's coming up here. And he says, I have no choice in the matter. I said, well, I'll be leaving. He says, do whatever I can to help you. I says, I won't need any help. At the same time, Briggs & Stratton had just opened up an industrial division. So, and I knew the key people at Briggs from different meetings that we had gone to. So I called the executive vice president and I said, I'd like to come and talk to you. I said, I understand you opened up a industrial division. And they bought a company called Ferryman Diesel. So he and I and the VP of sales had lunch. I was hired 2 days later as assistant manager to the industrial division. So I did that for approximately 79, 80, 81, 82, for about 4 years. And then there was an opening in Lawn and Garden, and the people from Lawn and Garden approached me and says, hey, we'd like you to come on board with us. There's going to be a territory that's opening up. So I finally get transferred over to Lawn and Garden, and fortunately, I get the East Coast and part of the Wisconsin territory. So I'm doing a lot of traveling, and did that for till about 1989. Yeah, 1989. And there were a lot of management changes at the time. The new guy came in and he said, I want to give you this account down south, okay? And their business was, at that time was about $300 million. So he says, and at the same time he says, we're going to make you general sales manager. So I did that for approximately 5 years. And I have to say that when you have an account that's worth about $300-400 million, you get burned out real quick. And my life at that time was, I would go into the office on Monday, I would check anything that had to be done. I would then jump on a plane, I'd go down to Jackson, Tennessee, because I had a customer in Jackson, Tennessee. I'd fly out of there Wednesday morning, I'd get into Augusta, Georgia at about 2 in the morning. Thursday morning, Wednesday morning. I'd do my business there on Wednesday, Thursday. I'd get home Thursday night, and then I had an account down in Illinois, and I'd go take care of them. And in between, I had 3 people working for me. So I was responsible for about $700 million worth of business at the time. So you get burned out real quick. So once I did the 5 years, then there were changes with the management again. And I became a national accounts manager, which I've really enjoyed. So I just traveled all over the United States taking care of both merchandisers and original equipment manufacturers. Okay. They retired me I was going to leave at the end of '08. They convinced me to stay 1 more year. I retired. Then they called me back and asked me if I would do training seminars for Sears/Briggs & Stratton. So I did training seminars for 4 years. And that would be January, February, March, and April. And then Sears put an end to that because, as you know, the history of Sears are probably going to be out of business very shortly. So that's pretty much my work history. Now, what did I do after I retired and after I did that? I became very heavily involved in the Sharon Wilson Center. I'm on the development committee for the Sharon Wilson Center. We also ushered there, and I was on the board for the Republican Party of Waukesha County. And I'm still active in politics and the Sharon Wilson Center. And my grandkids, who we sold our house to them 13 years ago, they live 7 blocks from here, so we spend a lot of time with the grandkids. Our daughter lives in Virginia, and she has 8 kids. So that's pretty much where I am today. Now, along the way, okay, I met a lot of interesting people and spent a lot of time doing some different things. We'll go back to my grade school days. I have 2 friends today that I have known since 2nd grade. And the one has lost his wife about 7-8 years ago. And he had a body shop, and he just closed that body shop. He's 75. I'll be 75 in July. The other one lives in Saukville. And the funny story with that is I dated his wife in high school before he dated her. So we have a little back and forth about that. Okay. Growing up, as I said, we did not have a lot of money. So if you wanted to do anything, you went out and you had to earn that money. Okay. While I was growing up, the highlight of growing up as far as what exciting things happened to me, I did see Warren Spahn, who was a pitcher for the Milwaukee Braves, pitch his first no-hitter. And that was a monumental thing for him because he was older at the time, and it was monumental because it happened for the Milwaukee Brewers. Okay. then you had asked me if I met any interesting people along the way, and I started writing this down last night. Okay, and I tried to keep it as short as possible. But if you haven't, there's a movie called We Were Soldiers. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's about the Vietnam War. It takes place in 1965 by a guy by the name of Lieutenant General Hal Moore, who was Lieutenant Colonel at the time, and it's his story. Okay, I was fortunate enough to have dinner and spend some time with him. So quite an interesting guy. I've had the opportunity to meet and greet with Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, Newt Gingrich, Ollie North, spent some time with Ollie North, Karl Rove, John Stossel, and a few other personalities off of Channel 6. I've had dinner with Scott Walker and his wife Tonette. And I've had the opportunity to get a big kiss and a hug from Marie Osmond, from Sophia Loren. And when I was working, we used to put on a little dinner for all of our distributors, and Chuck Berry was there one night, so he was playing. So I was up on stage dancing away with Chuck Berry and his band. Okay. Told you where I was stationed in Minneapolis, and I will leave the rest up to you if you have questions.
Well, would you like to elaborate on some of your stories? Like you said, you met Ronald Reagan, or you had dinner with...
Well, funny story with Ronald Reagan, okay, when I first met him, and I met him twice. The first time was at an airport in Dallas. And back in those days, you wore a suit. And I had my suit bag over my arm like this, standing in this line to say hello. So as I'm trying to get in line, this guy keeps pushing me out of the way. And I finally said, "Do you got a problem?" And he's security. And he says, "Would you lift your bag up, please?" So, "Do you have a gun under there or not?" I said, "Oh, boing, okay, I understand." So from there, he went off into a little area, and I followed him. I had some time. Got to ask him a couple questions about the presidency. And I have to say, meeting him in person, I've seen him on the screen. I've seen him on television. The guy was much more handsome in person, very tan, had a great handshake, and much taller than you realize that he was. Yeah. So that was a good experience. George Bush, we met when he was in town running for president. They had a special off-site meeting where he was there. Got to ask him a couple questions. Nothing exciting, just, I liked the guy back then. I thought he would make a good president. Met Romney. In fact, Romney did a video, a half-hour video, and in that video, he is shown giving my wife a kiss on her cheek. Because we were at the fairgrounds, and he came and he was shaking everybody, and we were up front because of getting there really early. And he's coming by, and she reached out, and he gave her a big hug, so that was kind of cool. Ollie North has some great stories. We met him at a function with the Boy Scouts, and I listened to his trial with the Iran-Contra deal, so I was fascinated by what he had to say and how well he handled himself and what he had to say in relationship to how it ended up. Okay, he was right on almost all accounts. Good guy, fun to talk to, a lot of good stories. John Stossel is a very short individual. I was surprised when I saw him. Fun to talk to. He's a libertarian, so he expounded a little on his free drugs, et cetera, et cetera. And we talked about that being a gateway to further drugs, and he says, at least give me the choice. I said, problem is we got to pay for your choices. So Karl Rove, met him at a function with about 30 people. He went to college with the guy that was having the function. Very upbeat. You can tell he's a politician type guy. Not too many stories, just in general. Get out there and vote, and do your thing, and blah, blah, blah. Newt Gingrich was more standoffish, I think, than the other people were. Chuck Berry was hilarious. Okay, Chuck Berry was high on something. I love his music, and in talking to him, he was down to earth, but he was high on something, so it's kind of hard to make sense of what he was saying. Scott Walker and his wife, I love Scott Walker. He's very down to earth. He's a very Christian person. So when we were with him, we tried not to talk politics. We tried more to talk about his family, his mom and dad. His mom used to bake cookies and bring them to the office, once a week. His brother's just an average, regular guy with kids. Scott Walker, to me, is true to his word. I don't think he's ever lied. He's done a lot for the state, and I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican at this point. When you look at where the state is today versus where it was, okay, it's unbelievable. The jobs, what he's created, what's going to happen. If we can keep it going, we will go back to being a very monumental, progressive, this is where I want to live. I want to live in Wisconsin. There are good jobs. Now, what are the jobs going to be? They're probably going to be more technical than anything else. The manufacturing, when we grew up, it's all gone. Okay, it's all gone. They do things differently. The Ellen Bradley's still here. That's Rockwell. Okay, but that's more into the technical end of things. Okay, Alice Chalmers is gone. The company I work for, Wisconsin Motors, because they were part of Teledyne used them as a cash cow. They ended up moving down to Memphis, Tennessee. So I was fortunate that I got out of there just in time, or who knows what would have happened. They lasted about a year in Memphis, Tennessee, then somebody else bought them, and then somebody else bought them. So within 4 years, they were broke. Okay, there was nothing left. The building that used to be on 53rd and Burnham, that's all torn down. It's just a piece of flat land. Okay, so that doesn't exist. Hal Moore had some interesting stories, and he talked about some of the guys that he was with. He talked about the sadness of the war. Talked about what it was like when people came back. We just came back from a honor flight for my cousin who was in Vietnam, who through Agent Orange got Parkinson's, and it was very sad. So when I was in Minneapolis, okay, at this little Air Force station, Snelling Air Force Station, we did have, it was wired, okay, and we did have to stand guard, and we did use live ammunition as we were standing guard. And we were told when we first got there that if you go downtown, do not wear your uniform, because there was such hatred for the Vietnam soldiers at that time. So we go to this flight a couple weeks ago, Saturday, and we're there to see my cousin, and this is our third or fourth time that we've done this, and it's extremely emotional when you see these guys. And I said to my wife, I says, I wonder how many people here, okay, spit on the soldiers when they came back home. So, but yeah, Hal Moore, if you guys haven't seen it, watch the movie We Were Soldiers, because it's based on true facts. Okay, now, do you have questions for me?
Yes. So back to, you said you were drafted into the military.
Yes.
What was kind of your overall emotion at first?
I believe in this country. I always have, and I always will. It was my duty. If they'd call me up today and say, we need you to do this, I would do it. Okay, that's how strongly I feel. There is no better place in the world to live than here. With all the crap that's going on and all the people that want to make us not great. Okay, if this is such a lousy country, then why is everybody trying to come here? Why isn't everybody trying to go to Venezuela or Russia or China? They all want to come here. Well, there has to be a reason. So and the future of this country is in your hands. It's well past me. Okay, it's up to you guys to make it what you want to make it. Do you want to vote? You have to. If you don't vote, don't ever complain about what's going on. And I tell this to people, and I know people who don't vote. They make a lot of money and they don't vote, and they bitch. And I say, why? Are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? If you don't vote, you really can't help anybody. So, yes, I had no problems when they said it's your turn.
So you mentioned before that you were alive during the Milwaukee riots.
Yes, in 1967. And in 1967, we were living on 51st Street. And at that point in time, you stayed in your house. okay? You didn't want to go anyplace. And if you did, you would run into armed soldiers. They had the National Guard out with their machine guns, okay? And that lasted, I forget how long it lasted, but it was quelled. And it was a priest by the name of Father Gropey who was instrumental in making this thing happen. So, and it started with their march across the 6th Street Viaduct. So, did it get any better? Are we any better off than we are now? Tough to say. Tough to say. Is there equality? I think there is. Do we take care of? No, let me back up. A lot of people abuse the system, as far as I'm concerned. I believe we should take care of the people who need our help. And there are a lot of people, whether they're invalids or whatever the reason, they need our help. We need to give them a hand up, okay? There are a lot of people who abuse the system, and we need to do something to get those people, okay? Do something with them, okay? You just can't let them abuse the system. I just read where Minnesota, Minneapolis, there's a group up there that have screwed Medicare out of $100 million. Well, think about what that money could do for the people who really need to be helped. You know, you get these mothers who have 4, 5, 6 kids and they want to get a job, okay, but they can only earn so much money because if they earn more than that, then their benefits are taken away. Well, guess what? Tier the benefits, okay? If this is how much money you make and these are your benefits, and you make this much money and all the benefits go away, why don't you just tier the benefits to the point where, okay, guess what? Now you get a little less money, but you're making more money. We want you to work. We want to help you. And I don't think we have that kind of system. Yeah, I make a joke, and I said, you know, the only difference between slavery then and slavery now is back then they worked. There's people here are slaves. They are slaves to the system. And if I can sit home and get $15,000, $16,000, $2,000 a month for not working, why should I go to work? Okay? What's the benefit of going to work? My self-worth? Pfft, I could care less. I can sit home and do nothing. You guys take care of me. We got to figure a way to help these people. And they're all colors. It doesn't make any difference. Don't, you know, it's not a racist thing. They're all different colors. And now you guys are faced with the drug thing, yeah, which when I grew up didn't exist. I mean, it was there, but it didn't exist as it does today. So how do you say to these people on drugs, well, you really shouldn't do that. Okay, how can we help you? You know, and I like what the governor's doing. I think he's got some good plans. Yeah, we have to help the people. We just can't throw money at them. Yeah, the old saying, you know, give a man a fish and whatever, and you know, but teach him how to fish and he'll have food for the rest of his life. And that's what we have to do. We have to help these people. We have to teach them. You know, I know a fellow right now who is in the people business. Okay, he's got 5 states: Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, whatever. Right now in Wisconsin, okay, there are 90,000 to 100,000 manufacturing jobs that they can't fill because they can't find qualified people. Whose problem is that? Is that your problem? Is that my problem? Well, it is, because if the jobs leave Wisconsin, where do they go? And once they leave Wisconsin, they ain't coming back. So you have to keep them here. You got to keep your tax benefits coming. Okay? It all goes hand in hand. I just saw on the radio or on TV the other day, this country is short 80 to 100,000 auto mechanics. Okay? But people don't want to get their hands dirty. And you guys watch TV. I know you don't watch a lot because you're in school. But the stuff they're showing on TV, they don't show anybody working for a living. They don't show a hardworking man coming home, or a husband and wife coming home both from work and trying to take care of their 3 or 4 kids. What they show is just a bunch of crap. They make the men look like idiots. Yeah, it's kind of sad where we've gotten. I'm expounding, so I better shut up. Next question.
So what was your opinion on some of the socialist mayors back then? So like Frank Seidler and...
I think back then it was so different than it is today. Okay? Does socialism work? No, it doesn't. You know, if it did, it would probably exist today. And you look at just the cities that are run by Democratic mayors or socialist mayors, and most of them are in the toilet. Okay, you look at the ones that are run by, I want to say conservative, let's not say Republican, conservative, okay, that understand capitalism works, okay, that's a good thing. You know, if I have a company and I have 100 people working for me, okay, my idea is to grow the company. Okay, I want that company to do good. I want my employees to do good. Okay, I want us all to share in the benefit. Now, does that mean that all my employees are going to make as much as me because I own the company? No, that's not how it works. But if I can offer you a fair living and I can grow my company at the same time, that's positive. Well, that's not how socialism wants it to work. Okay, they don't want it to be that way. And and I'm sure your folks have told you this story. You know, you're a straight A student, but now we get a new professor that comes in and he wants to be I want to do this as a socialist way. So, you're straight A's, the person down here that's getting D's, nah. You know what we're going to do? Okay, we're going to make this more fair. We're going to give them B's and C's. Well, that's not fair because you're working your ass off to get your A's. And guess what happens? Pretty soon they're up getting B pluses and A's just like you, and they're not doing any work. And you're going to say, well, why should I do any work anymore? You know, I'll just sit back like these guys do or these ladies do and do nothing and get the same grade. You know, it's like it's like piecework. Okay? Piecework is good from the standpoint that if you produce 100 widgets a day, you'll get paid for 100. If the guy down here gets 2 widgets a day, he'll get paid for 2. Okay, that's a good thing. But they don't want it to work like that. They want to give you the same thing that they're giving this person. And that's not fair. And life isn't fair, I know that also.
So how'd you feel about the civil rights movements back then, like with Father Graffi?
It was necessary. It was necessary. Selma, Alabama was necessary. If you go back and you look, you're going to get into politics here. If you look at Alabama, with Selma, Alabama, and you look at historically, okay, who was on what side, okay? The Republicans were for civil rights. The Democrats back then were opposed to civil rights. And I'm not making this up, this is fact, okay? Did we need it back then? God, yes. I can't even imagine what these people must have gone through to sit in the back of the bus. You can't drink from this fountain. I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely... I'm related to Woody Herman. Woody Herman was a band leader back in the 30s, 40s. Okay, I'm a third cousin. My grandma was Woody Herman's mother's sister. So I got a couple of books, and he talks about when they would go with their bands, and the blacks weren't allowed to stay in the same hotel. And I'm sure you've seen it in some of the movies you've seen. You know, it's, well, you're white, you can stay here, but no, I'm sorry. Or we're not, you got to come in the back door if you want to have dinner here. No, that was crap. Okay, that was crap. Does it exist today? To a degree, but I think it exists today towards everybody. Towards everybody. You know, and playing the race card today is, guess what? It's overblown. It's overblown. You want to make it a race card? That's fine, but it's not. It's not. And it's on both sides. You read stories, you see videos, you know. The best thing that happened is being able to take videos. And you can find out who's lying and who's not lying. So, yeah.
So just kind of back to like your whole life in Milwaukee. What was your best memory in Milwaukee?
My best memory in Milwaukee? All my girlfriends. No, I can't say that. I think just growing up the way we had the opportunity, and again, there was no money. Okay, growing up in Berryland, I thought was a great experience because everybody was at the same level. So you know, you got kids from all different colors, all different backgrounds, and we're all playing together. Okay, because you don't have more than me, and I don't have more than you. Okay, going to Holy Redeemer, I thought was a good experience from the standpoint that that's where I met my best friends in life, and I have 2 that are still alive that I've known since 2nd grade, and we get together all the time. And if anything I could wish for anybody is to be able to go through life with true friends. You know, and true friends are the friends that you can tell anything to and do anything for, and they'll do anything for you. Not Facebook friends. You know, I love these people who say, well, I got 1,000 Facebook friends. Well, big effing deal. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. Okay? It doesn't mean anything. True friends are the ones that'll give you the shirt off their back. Okay?
All right, so kind of on the other end, what was one of your worst memories in Milwaukee?
God's been good to me. He really has. Broke my arm. I really don't have any. I really don't have any. Like I said, God's been good to me. Had a good life. Have we had our ups and downs? Everybody has their ups and downs. But nothing that I would say really devastated me from having a nice life, okay? It doesn't. I've had broken bones and all that kind of crap, but no sad memories.
Did you ever attend any of some of the festivals in Milwaukee, so like Summerfest?
Oh, used to go to Summerfest every year. Used to take a week's vacation to go to Summerfest. And then the music changed. And the minute the music changed, we stopped going to Summerfest. We were there from the opening of Summerfest. I'd say probably we stopped going maybe 10 years ago. But no, maybe 15 years ago. But I'd take a week's vacation every year and we'd go to Summerfest because it was just fantastic. Loved the music. Yeah, loved to party. We'd go to amphitheater. We've seen a lot of people, seen a lot of great entertainment. Yeah, we love music. So.
Did you ever go to any of the ethnic festivals?
Went to all of them. Went to all of them. Irish Fest, Italian Fest, Polish Fest, Mexican Fest. Went to African Fest once.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your experiences there?
Being involved in the ethnic groups is interesting. Number one, the foods, okay, and we all enjoy eating, okay, so the foods are good. Their dancing is totally different than what you would be used to, but we love it. We love the Irish dancing. Love the Italian music, love the Italian singers that came in. Polish Fest is oompa, oompa, oompa type music. German Fest, love the food, love the beer. Never had a bad experience other than rain. Got rained out a couple times. But, and when I was working, Briggs had the Briggs stage. So they would bring in entertainment all the time, and then Briggs had a little building off to the side where you could sit up and drink beer for free, and so we used to do that. Met some entertainers. My old boss, the old president of Briggs, is a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so he was big into music. So he would bring in some good people. But yeah, festivals were fun. Even church festivals are fun.
All right. Is there anything that we didn't ask you about that you want to share?
No, I think you covered it all. Like you say, this world is yours. Do with it what you want.